Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I'm your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here today with Anthony, who is probably not read the title of this stream, but I'll say it out loud anyway. The Sunday Superversive live stream, Christianity's Recent Growth. But for the Zoomers and the Alephs out there, Christianity be BUSSIN. SEETHE Lesser Religions.
Amazing.
Thank you all for joining us. This is all that we're going to talk about today. As the man says, we speak Greek to God, violence to my enemies, and we don't talk to women. Except for the good ones. So, I guess I'll start us out. This is mostly going to be a stream in the spirit of ecumenicalism. I will be discussing some things that have come up in
Ben, I lost you for a moment, and you're not showing up as talking on Discord. Oh no. Like, I'm pretty sure it's not on my end, because it's not registering you as speaking. So, while we wait for Ben to fix the live stream, him. Yeah, while we wait for Ben to fix his live stream.
There we go.
There we go.
So basically, I need to
You
replace
lost
the
me
cord.
for a second there.
I know. It was entirely my microphone cord. Anyway, getting back to it. So South America has been a hotbed of religion for quite some time. Whether the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mayan demon religions, to Catholicism, and even now some branches of Protestantism, it's actually probably the most interesting place in Christianity to be, especially if you're going for it. And that's part of the reason comes from the fact that Pentecostalism, which I don't support, it is not one that has the Lord in it at all. Like, there are many Christians in Pentecostalism, but it's got, how do I want to say it? Like, Creflo Dollar and quite a few others are Pentecostals or Pentecostal adjacent, right? It leads to a lot of abuses. But it's also led to a big group explosion in missionary work and growth. And I want to go into it. But what's your opinion on it, especially in the growth of the church in South America?
So, Pentecostalism is an odd one to me. My knowledge of Pentecostalism is weirdly, for some reason, they tend to convert to Judaism at a oddly large rate. Like, I'm not saying that's the norm. It's not. It's still unusual. But I, distinctly remember bringing up to you, like, I just read this article about a Christian group that converted to Judaism, and you said, are they Pentecostals? And I didn't know, and I, looked at the article, and I went, wow, yeah, they are. It's like, yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
It's just a thing with Pentecostals. If I had to guess as to the reason behind the phenomenon, it's something along the lines of, Pentecostals want to return to, the roots of the faith and are really gung-ho about it, which accounts for, the big rise in, why they grow so rapidly. But also, they don't have any actual education, so as soon as they're confronted with, even mildly educated rabbis, it totally demolishes, their faith in Christianity. But
a
that's
little
a guess.
bit. There's a little bit more to it. A lot of them tend to be dispensationalists, which is what a lot of, and I don't want to get into this, but a lot of right-wing complaints about certain translations of the Protestant versions of the Bible tend to go through dispensationalist circles, when in actuality, if there's any dispensationalists out there, I'm sorry, but when God can raise people, the stones to praise him, when he enters into Jerusalem, he can raise 144,000 Jews in the end times from the stones as well. Um, but, and I'm just going to throw that out there, but it's essentially an over worship of Judaizing um, um happenings that eventually grows until it overwhelms sort of more reasonable Christ centered thinking.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really know a ton about like Pentecostalism specifically, like what accounts for it, except that like I have an image of my head of them as being like very charismatic type based.
Yes,
Now
they are
there is
the origins of the charismatic church.
yeah, there is a Catholic charismatic movement that is like not entirely unorthodox, and I use lowercase o orthodox obviously. Like, but there is a legitimate like Catholic charismatic movement,
Yeah.
and there's a big debate in the church over like whether or not that should even be permitted. As far as I could tell, the Catholic charismatics try to be like very careful about because they know that people are going to want to brand them heretical, but the fact that they need to be careful about it makes me immediately wary.
Yeah.
Like, what why not just not not risk it? But I don't know. It apparently like it has an effect on people.
Well, I can see why it affects a lot of Catholics, because you guys tend to be a lot more miracle centric
Yeah.
than the average bear, which is neither here nor there.
We do
Um,
and we don't. It's a different type of miracle. So like you get the Protestants, you get the old I'm trying to think of how to put it. The old cliche of like the street teacher who goes up with snakes and goes like, I handle snakes and they bite me and I don't get dead," or like
which is a brand of Pentecostalism, by the way.
yeah, or the really terrible ones who are literally just fraudsters and
Yeah.
hucksters who like in
Pop
a big
off,
crowd of people while
dollar.
everybody's whipped into a frenzy just go, "I'm gonna make this man walk again." And of course it's probably just a guy who occasionally has good days and who now has adrenaline pumping through him, and he takes a step out of his wheelchair and then it's like, yeah, that's right.
If it's
And
not
then
totally faked. We've
right,
all.
assuming this is assuming it's not totally fake, which certainly it will be sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
uh Catholic miracles, like, yes, it's a big part of their religion. Like, there are Protestant sects that are very, very heavy on miracles in the way that I described. There are Protestant sects that believe that there are no miracles. Like, there have been books written on it,
Yep.
that, like, oh, the age of miracles is over.
Yep.
Which I don't think that there's any real cause to believe, but
And
the Catholic...
it's so just for that, a lot of it comes from overreaction. The apostles
Yeah,
did things, and then the apostles stopped doing things. Because, like, well, my pastor commented on it this morning, where it's like, if the apostles were healers, they're terrible healers because they just stopped healing people even when they were needed. Like, several times Paul leaves a guy sick on an island, and he's like, I just have to keep going. Sorry, dude. And then he writes him a letter. I think Philippians, and it's mentioned in
well,
Acts, it happens. And I'm
I
not
think
saying
if they
anything about
had,
it,
like,
but just.
I would say probably that the apostles ended up becoming more, and Carl Philip Gabler says, "Yo, what up?" Hey, Carl.
Yo!
So keep in mind, I'm trying to avoid speaking from perspective that goes like, well, because they were Catholic or whatever, which I also think is not even productive in any sense, and I don't think is true either. Like, I think God can work through anyone, but
Right.
I will say that I do think that it probably ended up after the Ascension that the rate of miracles that were being done by the apostles and healings and things like that probably did go down. Like, before that, we know that Jesus gave the apostles, right? Like,
Yes.
it's explicit in the Bible. They were given the ability to heal, right?
Yes.
Like, this is there. But as you say, you are completely correct. After the Ascension and Acts and whatever, that seems to not be happening, at least as much. However, we do see the apostles doing things with explicit religious authority. For example, was it Ananias and Sapphira, am I right?
Yep.
That Peter strikes dead?
Yep.
In one of the most dramatic examples. So, it's not like they totally lost all ability to do things. I think rather that it became a lot more like what you see in the modern day, where miracles happen on God's good time, and the apostles, being very, very holy men, would sometimes be able to, they would have that intuition where it's like, I know right now, because I'm an extremely holy person who is in tune with God and the spiritual world, that if you don't listen to me, then the Holy Spirit will strike you down, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Uh, so I get what you're saying. Like, I know that there was like a totally anti-miracle movement in Protestantism. The Catholic Church tries to take, at least in theory, in practice it doesn't always work like this, but they try to take a somewhat scientific approach to it. Uh, where miracles are investigated. Now, I reject with John C. Wright said this, and I did not agree with him at first, but I thought about it, and now I do. I reject Hume's definition of a miracle as a suspension of, the laws of nature. I don't think that's accurate. As John pointed out, he said, I would not be surprised if every miracle actually had an answer that was entirely in keeping with the laws of nature. Just wildly unlikely. Right? Like,
Yep.
that we didn't know about. I don't think that that necessarily makes it not a miracle. It's just that God is intervening, but he might be using the laws of nature to intervene. So that's why I see that sometimes, where, like, Mother Teresa, for example, one of her miracles, doctors have said, oh no, it was technically possible. Well, yes, it was. It was unbelievably unlikely, and it wasn't happening until an explicit prayer was said, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm not telling you to accept claims about Mother Teresa, nor am I even going to bother making that argument now. I'm just saying that that specific argument against it does not move me. And I don't
Right.
think it should move anyone. Like, I think, yeah, you look at a guy who struck dead and you go, oh, he just happened to have a heart attack. Right when you said he would have a heart attack, at the point he insulted God, when you said that this is exactly what would happen if he did this thing.
Right.
And, like,
Which I have heard of in the modern world under very
right,
specific rules with men who have very specific purposes. It's
right.
it's
So,
very it's very controlled, and it's always to a purpose that isn't, shall we say, friendly to an atheist who's trying to explain away a miracle.
right. So,
But
like, the question is, if you check the health of that person, would you see, oh, well, it was a perfectly logical scientific heart attack? I mean, maybe, I
yeah,
guess, but who cares?
like the cancer came back. Oh, the cancer came back suddenly, and it suddenly, absolutely wrecked him in ways we weren't expecting. Just suddenly came back. Yeah, it's not a miracle. Uh huh. Like that sort of thing. Like it's not on our time or our understanding, but it's used to deceive people who are not as educated in the Bible. Like there is my dad has been doing a Sunday school and I've been attending it for personal reasons. And one of the things that kind of shocked him is that he has many opinions, but he had a certain knowledge about the translation of a word in Jude because they gave him Jude to teach. And it's one of those words that has multiple meanings. And in other places, close to the church founders, is translated as beloved instead of sanctified. So it's pretty free with the definition. You know, some places say sanctified, some places say beloved. But the idea that it was the same root word as beloved was unknown to the people who were educated, who were, gray haired, very old. I go to the old person one because they have meat, and I want meat. I want meat, baby. Um, and it just kind of went through there. And he was kind of shocked that they didn't know this. Well, I'm like, Dad, they don't know this. Normal people don't know, Greek and stuff like that. And so on and so forth. Like, it's acceptable for this stuff to happen. The problem is that the hucksters get away with a lot. The reason why I bring up Pentecostalism is that it's gained like 50 million people in a scant few years, very quickly compared to some missionaries' work, um, and it's absolutely taken over places like Brazil and Argentina, and it's spreading pretty quick. And some of them are acting like hucksters. They're having their things. Oh, we got to build a church just like Solomon's Temple and stuff like that, which admittedly, it's alright. It's pretty cool, building Solomon's Temple here on Earth. Alright, I'm not even mad. But when it comes down to it, it does interfere with a lot of how people interact with the gospel. And because of it, it causes confusion and damage to what we can look forward to as missionaries or witnessing to others. But the thing is that it's actually had weird knock-on effects. Bible sales are going up. People are asking questions. Previously, it was understood that everyone is going to say that they are Catholic or atheist, but they would never attend anywhere or anything or do anything about it. Mostly Catholic. Well, I was baptized a Catholic. When have you gone back to church? I'll send my kids back. And there were many holy people I am aware of, and even among Frog Twitter, of some women and stuff like that, men who are very holy Catholics. But for the common person, who is not the exceptional person, who is not the person seeking God, they have been going to the Pentecostal churches, and it's actually opened them up to other missionaries, because it's like, oh, I go to the church with the mega pastor. And it's like, yeah, he has got some, and it's like one of those things where it's like you can crack him open with that. And it really does help the spread of the gospel, because it all of a sudden, these people are not passively a part of, saying they're a part of something and giving like a false number. Somebody who hasn't been to church since they were born and has no interest in God, has never prayed a word of prayer in their life, is not saved. They are not saved. If they do not believe in God, if they do not believe in Jesus Christ, they are not saved. And I guarantee you, a lot of these people you could not tell which ones were Christian if you gave them a list of their actions, good or bad. So it's like that. Like, we're removing people from sort of this malaise of, oh, I'm this, but I've never actually practiced it or believed it, to something that they can believe in that will hopefully open them up to God's Word more. That's the reason why I said this was kind of controversial, because it's saying that, yes, there are 100 million, 300 million, however many 100 million people who say that they are Catholics in South America. However, I know that church attendance is stupid low, even before COVID, based on the percentages of people who said that they do it. Therefore, new numbers of people who go to church means that the gospel is more easily being spread because people are seeking God. Did that make sense? Or am I just going
It does.
crazy?
So here's the thing about like South America, and also just generally about the state of the Catholic Church specifically, in my knowledge of what's going on. So the Catholic Church there is this thing going around that like the Catholic Church is obviously dying. This is not really true.
Right.
In terms of numbers, the Catholic Church has not been like exploding in growth, but it's experienced pretty steady growth along with the rate of the population. It's true that U.S. Catholics, the number of U.S. Catholics are going up for the first time in a while. There's a variety of reasons for this. I do not give credit to Francis for it. I'm on the record as being in an unusual position among Catholics, in that I will simultaneously say that I think that Francis is the Pope. I think that attempts to try and argue away from it are like a type of copium among Catholics.
Right.
This is like entirely inter-Catholic politics at this point, but it's important when we're talking about this specific subject. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to like wallow in it, but I'll give like a very, very brief rundown of like the controversy.
Right.
There's what's called been given various names, but basically there's this argument that Benedict is actually the Pope and he never really resigned, and Francis is not the Pope. This is pure copium. This is because Francis has been a terrible Pope, which he has.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a disaster for the church, and that is, I think, pretty indisputable once you actually look at his concrete actions. and lay them out end to end. Yes, it is true that when people have outright tried to change doctrine, Francis has said, no, you can't do that. That's because the church as a structure is so, like, built to withstand that. Like, basically the entire church as a structure. And I'm wording this, forget guarantees of the Holy Spirit. I'm trying to give you an explanation from a more, from a perspective maybe a Protestant can see making sense, right?
Right.
The church as a structure is entirely built against, explicit changes in doctrine. There would be so much going against that even Pope Francis, for all of his looseness, his MO tends to be wording things very vaguely and not saying anything concrete and implying that you could just kind of do things that go against it in the name of charity. But if you try to do something that is explicitly against the faith, that is explicitly against a written down in stone teaching, then the Pope will generally say, no, you can't do that. This is what happened recently with the German bishops. So, with all that said, that would mean that definitionally, I don't think the Pope is a formal heretic. I do think he is the Pope. I think he was validly elected. I think the idea that he was not validly elected is basically nonsensical, because I don't think it makes sense that every bishop in the world, at least at one point after his election, could universally acknowledge Francis as Pope, and then later just be wrong about it. It would make the entire claim to the papacy make no sense.
And
So
from
I think,
excuse me, and from a
go ahead.
Protestant perspective, I don't know of any irregularities with his election at all. Like it's one of those things where if there were irregularities, like say a recent 2020 election, there would be people talking about it constantly, and I don't mean like the fringe weird Catholics, and I mean like,
and there were
yeah,
irregularities, but the irregularities were in, I'll put it this way, they were well within the historical norms.
right,
Like, if you know anything about how popes are elected, it's not it could be a down and dirty business, and there was nothing that happened in this election that was any more extreme than this is where I will say that I agree with some of, like, oh, it was worse in the Renaissance and whatever. Like, yeah, sure, there was a lobby that wanted Francis elected, like, but that's not an irregularity. That's just a lobby that wanted Francis elected. It's certainly no more extreme than popes that were elected in the Renaissance and Middle Ages, which Catholics accept.
right.
So why would you not accept Francis then? Because you don't like this lobby. Well, I don't either. I don't think Francis is a good pope. But that doesn't make the election invalid.
Yep.
Now, that is on the one hand. On the other hand, I think Francis has been a disaster. I don't really think that there's any way around that. I think that you could argue that he hasn't changed teachings, which I would agree with. I don't think that you could argue that he hasn't, for example, shuffled around sex abusers. He absolutely has done that. Now, supposedly John Paul II did that too, but John Paul II was a very different situation. First, he did it when these things were first coming to light, and it was kind of like nobody really believed it at the time. And second, he was extremely ill, like he was dying. This happened near the end of his papacy, when he was basically just on his deathbed for the entire tail end of his papacy after his assassination attempt. So I'm willing to give John Paul II a lot more leeway than I am Francis, who came into the papacy knowing that all of this was a thing. He didn't need to be talked into it.
Yep.
He didn't need to be shown evidence. He was not ill when he entered. Like, he should have known better, and he's still shuffling around sex abusers. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Why would you do that? I won't speculate on Benedict's motives for resigning. Can leave that to Protestants who are interested. Most aren't.
Yeah. It's a political position in some ways. Therefore, various political powers acted on each other, and it forced things to happen. Like, it's not like the maneuvering and so on and so forth isn't like, oh, it's shocking. How dare the church's political institution have politics? Shocked, I tell you.
I'm sure, I've seen him interpreted in a positive and a negative way, what Benedict did. I will not speculate as to motives, except that I'll say that I do take Benedict at his word. He didn't think he was capable of doing the job properly, so he decided to leave it to other people. Whether that was the right move or not, it's 2020 hindsight.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that he's lived into his 90s is kind of remarkable. I'm actually amazed he's still alive. I did not think, but perhaps the reason he's still alive is that he resigned the papacy and doesn't have that stress to deal with. But whatever. Uh, yeah, I think that there's this whole thing about Benedict, like, oh, he only resigned like the office, but not the ministerium. But I don't think it comes down to this for me, in terms of who the Pope is. There is one body and only one that has the requisite qualifications to judge who the Pope is. That body is the College of Cardinals, and they acknowledged Francis. So that's it. That's like, there is no other body that exists that you could appeal to. There is nobody that you could point to and go, well, what about them? Or what about them? No, it's the College of Cardinals' job to judge who the Pope is, and they have judged that the Pope is Francis. That's it.
Yep.
Now, he's been a disaster. Specifically, I would point to multiple things. Pachamama is a bad one. I want to point out that after Pachamama, I should link this to you, Ben. After Pachamama, I predicted that there would be a plague, and then within like a couple months, COVID-19 hit.
I found other articles about that. Like, I
predicted it at the time.
Sure, no argument for me. But it's but if you have a link, please, especially with a date on it. But it's it's one of those things where we're not playing a game. We're not playing some video game or whatever. Like, there are real spiritual consequences for the things we do. If I do, or if Anthony does, evil in our lives after declaring the gospel like this, there are consequences for it that are beyond it. Like, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I have met people who have lost their life savings because they got wound up in somebody's cult of personality. Now, a radical individualist will say, a libertarian will say, that, well, it was them who got, stupid, and it's no business of yours how stupid they were. But the thing is that it was by Christian means. And even though the megachurch pastors are very public, so is Pope Francis. I will in a day flip through Twitter. Pope Francis shuts down the Synod, which is the German bishops who, if I understand correctly, wanted to make women priests. Among other things.
They wanted to change the teachings on homosexuality as well. That was never going to fly. It just wasn't. Like, that's one of those things that...
Yeah.
Even Francis just would not do that.
Right. And the other thing was Pope Francis issues apology in Canada to the indigenous peoples for the deaths, which have been proven false.
Right. That was one of the things, like, what deaths? There were no deaths.
And it's like... sure, and I'll admit I was fooled by it. It looked really good. The articles were really snazzy. But of course, once I saw counter evidence, it's like, oh, no, these were tuberculosis and smallpox deaths, like everywhere else, and white people, anyway.
So I just linked you from November 1st, 2019. That's literally me just being horrified at the Pachamama incident. It's nothing but me going, I have no words to express how much this makes my skin crawl, and also keep up to date on your shots.
Right.
So, and this is in November 2019.
After the golden incident, God sent down a plague. All right, I'll link it in the chat.
That's an old article of mine, and it's just like, I said the only thing that, of course, makes me think maybe not is that the COVID-19 plague wasn't that bad. But whatever.
Well, no, what it did was it forced a lot of people out of the church because they made their choice for whether or not they want to, risk, interacting with people, disgusting people, and serve God that way. And it actually, long term, I think will be very beneficial because it shows kids how things go. And I think that as more time goes on, we'll actually have a generation of Zoomers rising up who understand things like gatekeeping and exclusion. When you're in the witness field, there's no such thing as exclusion. But when you're running a
So,
church, yeah.
yes. So here's the thing, though. With all that I've said, that I think the list that I would have, Pachamama's on that list. I would also put Pope Francis's change in the Catechism on the death penalty. He specifically talks about that there was a change in how the church viewed death penalty. That in itself is fine. Like, you can change your opinion on how often you think the death penalty should or if it should be used. But what the Catechism says is that it is against human dignity, which is false. That is just straight up wrong. There is no, uh, there is nothing that you could say that, like, it's not against the human dignity because it's not inherently immoral. And
Right.
doing things that are against human dignity are inherently immoral. So this is incorrect. Now, what is the Catechism is just a compendium of teachings. It does not itself create new teachings. Uh, However, it is deeply misleading for that to be there, which I have a serious problem with. Because it gives the impression that the church changed its teaching on the death penalty, which it absolutely did not and cannot do.
Hmm.
Amoris Laetitia, I have a huge issue with. That was his encyclical. Most of the encyclical is a very vague, very fluffy, and basically pointless encyclical on, like, be nice to people, more or less. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. However, there is a footnote in the encyclical Amoris Laetitia that seems to maybe, and in typical Francis fashion, kind of vaguely imply that if you are divorced and get remarried, you should be permitted to take communion, which is a contradiction of the Bible. Like in Paul, if you are in a state of serious, grave sin, then you can't receive communion. And,
Yep.
like, so several cardinals, like I think 30 odd cardinals or something like that, came together requesting the Pope to clarify what he meant by this, and he refused to answer. Like, the only comments he ever made on it were very vague comments in interviews that were like, I don't gotta answer that. So, don't know. Why is that even there if it's not changing anything? And if it is changing, like, what do you mean? Why is that there? So I have a serious issue with that. I have a serious issue with the shuffling around of sex offenders. I have a serious issue with the motu proprio that placed heavy restrictions on the saying of the Latin Mass, which I can attest is where I have seen the Holy Spirit working by far the most. I went on on regular random Sundays that were not not Christmas, not Easter, not a feast day, where I had to park several parking lots away to get to a Latin Mass. Never in my life have I had to do that for any other type of Mass. And this is what he decides to restrict. And, like, I go to these homilies, they don't even mention the Pope. Like, the most they said is the one thing I remember from one of the homilies was they called Martin Luther the arch heretic, which I found I found that kind of amusing. But the point being, like, the Pope wasn't brought up. It's not like they constantly complained about the Vatican. So I don't know what he's talking about there. And the fact that this is what he chose to restrict and not the horrendous abuses that go on regularly in Novus Ordo masses, I think that that's a huge error. I think generally, like you said, the trip to Canada was just bizarre and weird and kind of embarrassing. Lots and lots of things. The fact, he abandoned the Chinese
Yep.
Catholic, which was just shameful.
We'll talk
Truly.
about China in a bit. It is on the list of things I'd like to
Yes.
talk about.
And his abandonment of the Chinese Catholics was just shameful. So, I say all of this as set up to why is the Catholic Church not dying? And the answer is the Catholic Church is quite large, and as important as the Pope is, he has one person in it. So, there are lots of different things that affect whether the Catholic Church is going to grow or shrink, or die, or live, or whatever. What I would point to is that anywhere that the church happens to be suffering in any significant way, the church grows. Catholic, Christian, both Protestant and Catholic, by the
Yep.
way. This does not apply to the Catholic Church. So, the church is growing in China. Now, you've pointed out, and you're right, the Protestant church is growing as well, and there are more Protestants than Catholics, which is true. But it is growing in China.
Yep.
It's growing in Africa. It's growing, and by the way, some of the African cardinals are some of the most based cardinals in the world. They're amazing. Cardinal Arins and Cardinal Robert Sarah.
We've had my
be...
pastor, who's done quite a bit of mission work in Africa, to talk on in another live stream. Like it's absolutely happening across the board. It's just that it's not big and flashy, and there aren't, a lot of things that people can kind of point to and go, yeah.
So there's South America. Now, why would the Christian church, Catholic and Protestant, be growing in America, given what I just said? Well, my theory is that after COVID-19 revealed that we were living in a hostile nation, that actually galvanized people.
Yep. Now, specifically, not boomers. There has been no change in the boomers in my church, but more young people have shown up, and a lot of the growth in churches that we're seeing is from the young, not from the old,
which is amazing, and
Yep.
I love that. But so, like, just think of it this way. Like I just said, trying to think of how to put it. I just said that Christianity grows where it is being persecuted, and it's growing in the United States. Now, if you complete the syllogism, I'm not saying that we are being persecuted in the same way that the Chinese or the Africans or the South Americans are, where where Christianity is exploding. I am saying that COVID-19 specifically revealed that we are not living in friendly territory.
Yep.
We are not living in a world where the Christian church is anymore the dominant cultural force. We're living in enemy territory.
I fully expect them to try and shut down churches based on monkeypox.
Yeah, they might.
Like it's...
So Carl says, it seems hard to criticize or praise or even understand Catholicism because it's so sprawling. Seems some of what people understand of Catholicism isn't even dogma. I don't know. I would say that you got to be kind of careful that when you talk about the essentials of Catholicism, that's very different from like the larger political state of Catholicism.
Yeah.
I think that people overcomplicate it. Like, for example, the various levels of what you need to assent to with infallibility. Like, yes, it's all written out, and you can understand it on that level, on a professorial level, where you go, well, is this infallible or is this not infallible? But in practice, what it means is, similar to what it would mean where you're like interpreting what decrees to listen to from the government. Obviously some have more weight than others. Obviously some things need to be understood as having weight over others. And in a practical sense, you could get along in the day-to-day just by understanding what the essentials of being an American is, and what the laws are, and what it means to be a good American.
If you want a good mental shortcut, Catholics and Protestants produced scientists and engineers during the Industrial Revolution. Christianity was the forefront of science.
Yes.
The thing is, though, as a general rule, more engineers were Protestant and more scientists were Catholic. Now,
that's interesting. I haven't thought of that before, but it seems about right.
If you look at where things were developed, a lot of the engineering came from, as in practical uses of science in the day-to-day, like the railroad and whatnot, came from England, Scotland, that sort of thing. Scottish engineers were renowned for their skills. But many things, especially like the basis of hereditary traits, came from Catholics and Catholic sources. It's one of those things where certain mindsets is inculcated within and then promoted. Very mental people like Catholicism because it is very mental. The problem is that sorry, did I say Catholicism or Protestantism?
In regards to what?
To mental people who like Catholicism.
Oh, I think that. Either way, I get your point.
Yeah. For some reason, I can't think of it straight. But it's basically, it has a certain appeal to them. However, that doesn't mean that very smart people can't have Protestantism. It's just that a different type of person pursues it. And it causes people to sort of say, well, the intellectual this, intellectual that. Well, in reality, the gospel is being spread in China, and Catholicism is mental. Yeah, you know it. What a diss. That's right. Grug supremacy. But the Grug Protestantism.
No, everything you're saying, I could definitely like it. It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I have no argument with it.
Yeah, it's a psychological thing, but it has a direct response over how we perceive faith. Um, Not perceive faith, excuse me, how we interact with our faith. How we love God. But the thing is that the focus, like in Brian Niemeyer's witch test, is on Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter what type of person they are if they can't pass the witch test, or you cannot infer the witch test from their lives in an objective standpoint. It sort of takes it away. One of the things that I've heard many, many times is my parents were, Catholic, Protestant, Presbyterian, whatever. They did not live like Christians. Why should I be a Christian if my parents didn't live in it? Let's say that at a certain point, the Catholic majority of South America was truly, truly legitimate. Now, I believe it is a cultural thing, but that is my beliefs. I do not. I believe that many people were saved because of the Catholic priests who destroyed much of the Aztec religion. So, I'm going to say that there. But let's say after 3 or 4 generations, the parents, the boomers and the Gen Y and the Gen Xers, did not live like Christians, which is a particular thing among those 3 generations, whatever the faults of the greatest generation were. Therefore, the children, the millennials, the Zoomers, and the alphas coming up, have that choice to become more religious, or to continue in the problems of their forefathers and say, well, whatever I was baptized as when I was 0 years old, I am, even though they've never crossed the threshold since. Right? Like, whatever people say about themselves, their actions are actually what's most important. The Bible's very clear on this. Faith, sure, but works. And I'm not saying works are more important than faith. I'm just saying that, like, we cannot see their heart, therefore we can see their works. To go over China, I don't really understand how the Pope abandoned the priests and so on in China, but I do know that Protestant missions have been absolutely exploding. And a lot of it is hidden in the guise of business trips and whatnot, student exercises. And it provided that we don't go into war with them in the next 5 minutes or something. Thank you, Nancy Pelosi. That relationship will continue. Many missionaries have certain tricks that they perform and spread many different, tracks and gospel information for people to have. Hey, you want a 5-minute English lesson? And then they use it for witnessing. It changes an atheistic people to a Christian people slowly but surely. The same way with South America. Just because they're Pentecostal today doesn't mean they're going to be Pentecostal after we discuss their new Bible interests. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, look, the conversion to Christianity, like whatever denomination, I say this even as a Catholic, is a good thing. Like, even if you're going like, well, they don't, if from your perspective too, like a Pentecostal, well, okay, they don't have the exact right truth, but they're a lot closer to the truth than they were.
Yep.
A lot closer.
Yep.
They are moving in the right direction. Now, in terms of China specifically, and like how Francis abandoned China, basically what happened is that like priests were getting arrested by China's communist government, and Francis like said not a word and did absolutely nothing about it. And like I think he might have even like removed cardinalate from one of the Chinese bishops, though I could be misremembering that. I would have to double check specifically. But he's offered them absolutely no support, even though they're literally rounding Christians into concentration camps and like burning churches down.
Yep.
So yeah, like the fact that he's not offering them any public support is shameful. Now, you could make the argument, I suppose, if you really, really wanted to be nice, which I am not inclined to do, but that maybe he thinks that by making any sort of public comment, that would make things worse. But I don't buy that at all.
Right. Like,
So,
I've been very vague with how I refer to it. Yes, there is a real threat that talking too much about Christian missions in China will, burn people and cause them to be discovered by the government. However, the Catholic Church has an intelligence apparatus. They can protect their own, no matter what, some random people are saying about, the communist China's power.
yeah, so with that said, the church, Catholic and Protestant more so at the moment, but that doesn't mean the Catholic Church isn't growing. Is like Christians are growing in China.
Yep.
And the reason they are growing in China is because Christianity always grows when there are martyrs.
Yep.
There is one exception to this, and only one, to my knowledge. There might be more that are lesser known, but one famous exception. That is Japan. And that's because Japan was actually really devious about the way that they did it. They realized, like, Japan had a kind of evil genius to what they did, I have to admit. Like, they realized that these public mass executions of Christians were doing the opposite of what they were intended to do. So, in an extremely, like, diabolical way, they moved the executions underground and made them secret executions. Then they would bring in missionaries. And they would tell them, we'll stop the executions if you step on this image of Christ, indicating, apostasy. And otherwise, we're just going to keep torturing and murdering these fellow Christians in front of you while you watch. But it's not going to be public. There's no glorious martyrdom. And we're not going to kill you, so you can't be martyred and you can't be holy. There is a genius to this because it kind of cuts out the, like the whole benefit, right, of martyrdom is that you die for God, and then also it's a glorious death. Now you're just letting other people die in front of you, and they're not even doing it publicly, so they're not inspiring anybody else. They're just torturing you while waiting for you to step on the image of Jesus, and most of them did. This is what the book Silence is about, which was written by a Catholic. But Silence is a horror novel. It ends with him stepping on the image of Jesus, and then he becomes like a state, basically a stooge of the Japanese state is how the novel ends.
And the thing is that, like, martyrdom is public and private. It's not, like, just, for that. If somebody, walks up to you in a dark alley and shoots you twice in the back because you're a Christian, that you're still being martyred in a way.
Oh yeah, it doesn't get rid of the objective, the objective heroism of the martyr and the objective faithfulness of the martyr is absolutely still there.
But in a psychologically tense situation like that, it just the ability to discern, what's actually happening, is absolutely removed from the person.
Yeah, it's a truly horrifying situation. And it worked because Japan kind of it didn't eradicate it. There are Christians in Japan, Catholics and Protestant. I know of Protestant missionaries to Japan. I know of Catholic missionaries to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
However, it worked in the sense that like Christianity was gaining a major foothold in Japan, and they stopped it in its tracks. Like they stopped it stone cold. They actually reversed it. And in the history of Christianity, as far as I know, I'm sure there are probably smaller exceptions on some like remote Asian islands or whatever, but that's the only major example I could think of that ever happening. Like, not over a long period of time, not, over centuries, eventually the faith wanes, but of an intentional reversal, elimination of Christianity, that just doesn't happen, and Japan
Yep.
figured it out.
Not even
Like,
Muslims could handle it. Like, at most, what they could do is sort of mind break the Janissary core and make them loyal, but they couldn't actually break the spirits of the common people.
yeah, exactly. Uh, it's true in the modern Middle East, like, Christians are being driven out of certain areas, but that's the thing. That's been reversing itself recently. Like,
Yep.
relatively recently. I want to say, like, 2011 or something like that. The last Christians were driven out of Nineveh. Well, they're back now.
Yep.
Like, things are reversing in the Middle East. They did not reverse in Japan, and they are kind of very slowly. Uh, I always heard, like, somebody said that the Japanese Christians used to apostatize and then just go to confession. I used to think, well, isn't that like a mistreatment of confession, like a misunderstanding of what's supposed to do? But I sort of get it now. Like, I sort of understand more what they mean. Like, in an incredibly psychologically fraught situation, they gave in. But then when they were more in their right mind, they said, no, that's not what we are. And that I can respect a little
Yeah.
bit more, right? Like, there's always the question of, like, what would you do in that situation? Like, would you step on I think it was called the Fumie, that was the name of the image of Christ. Uh, and it's like, you want to say no, but how do you know that? There were incredible people, amazing men, missionaries who put their lives on the line, who stepped on the Fumie. Like, they would step on it. So you say you won't? Like, you don't know that. I like to think I won't,
And this sort of
but
thing
it's very
is going
difficult.
on, throughout the world now. A lot of governments are sort of not taking a harder stance, because this is nothing new since before we were born, but sort of taking a more, shall we say, proactive denial. China is very, very closed minded about how it handles Christianity. Taiwan is sort of a bastion of Christianity, but it won't be for long if they get taken. But then again, the amount of cults in Taiwan are insane. Therefore, it might even be beneficial to them to be oppressed so that the gospel flourishes. Um, the meme, of course, is that in our circles anyway, is that, oh, look, Catholicism is growing in China, and it's like 8 million, but the Protestants are 50 million, and it's like, okay, but like, what about that big number? Well, no. Focus on the Catholic one. Huh?
No, yeah, the Protestants absolutely, like, there are more, but
Yeah,
Christianity is growing in China.
Christianity
It's
is
clear.
absolutely growing, and
Right.
it's yeah. I'm just sort of making fun of a friend, basically, which I guess I shouldn't do without him here to defend himself. But it's one of those things where
Just
as
flexing.
Christians we need to sort of be careful about um, when we're growing the gospel, weird arguments between Catholics and Protestants has no place in their mind. They don't understand it. They don't care, right? You're just Christians, except the Catholics are the one with the funny hat. You know, not
Right.
much else to
That's
it.
when China looks at Christians, they just look at Christians.
Yep.
Uh, in terms of, like, yeah. With that said, I mentioned that the Japanese did it. The Japanese are the only ones, like I said, on any large scale who have managed to do anything like that. Most of the time, in times of persecution, uh, Christianity grows. And Japan, by the way, let's not give up on the island of Japan yet. Uh, Christianity may flourish there yet. Missionaries still visit Japan,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Uh, there and as far as I know, like, if you look at portrayals, I once did like an assignment on this for college. If you look at portrayals in Japanese media, anime and things on Christianity, it's kind of fascinating because they tend to view Christianity as, like, the mysterious Western religion that's a little bit creepy but also kind of cool, because almost like, we defeated them in World War II, so Christianity is like the conqueror's religion. This is where you get, like, for example, in Van Helsing, or not Van Helsing, just Helsing. Helsing and Helsing Ultimate, you know, where their portrayal of Christianity is just like badass priests with who carry around crosses that they use to fight monsters, or you know, what's it called, Evangelion,
Yep.
Neon Genesis Evangelion, and uh, Hideaki Anno has straight up admitted that there's no larger meaning to the use of Christian symbolism in the series, but it does tell you that in the Japanese cultural context, Christianity is associated with creepy, powerful, uh, almost unknowable, ineffable, right? Like, that's
Yep.
how Japanese view Christianity. The exception, of course, to this is the uh, my one of my favorite shows, Trigun, which was written by somebody who, at least at the time, considered himself one of Japan's only Catholics. If you talk to Yasuhiro Naito today, in interviews, he's always very cagey about his religion. He'll sometimes describe himself as Catholic. Sometimes he'll say he left. Sometimes he'll say he's like a Catholic / Buddhist. But there is no denying that. So I, pray for the soul of Yasuhiro Naito. Clearly, he's working through some things. But if you actually watch Trigun and you watch his shows, there is a clear Christian philosophy at the center of it, right?
Yep.
Trigun is incredibly Christian. It's one of the most Christian shows I've ever seen, and it's fascinating in its Christianity, in that it has one of those badass priest-type characters. There's Wolfwood, who carries around a gigantic gun hidden inside the cross that he lugs around on his back. But it deconstructs this in a way where it, like, really examines, what it means to be a Christian and what it means to... And that's really inspiring. Blood Blockade Battlefront has it there a little bit with, like, it at the very least, it's less explicit than Trigun is, but it's kind of there as part of its background philosophy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In Blood Blockade Battlefront, they have one of the characters is a priest who is like a vampire hunter or something. And I don't think Blood Blockade Battlefront is as good as Trigun for a number of reasons, but I appreciate it. I'm glad it exists.
Yeah.
But Trigun is really amazing in how it shows you kind of like how a Christian in Japan views Christianity, Catholicism specifically, in Japan. How does he view it? Like, what does it mean to him? That's where it's interesting. And Miyazaki is generally looks at things from what appears to be a Shintoist perspective, though I don't think he'd be as explicit about that. Like, I don't think he would say that his movies were Shintoist, but I think that's just the implicit philosophy in the background of a lot of his films, like Totoro, Mononoke. With the one exception, the one very interesting exception of Porco Rosso. Porco Rosso is explicitly Christian. And fascinatingly, I think, like, they actually pray in Porco Rosso. Like, they sit down to dinner and they say a grace before meals.
Yep.
Which makes Porco look extremely uncomfortable. And then later, when he is describing how he turned into a pig, he, like, rationalizes it as, like, in Christian terminology, like, using Christian terminology is how he rationalizes what happened to him. So the philosophy of Porco Rosso is, in fact, explicitly Christian, which is fascinating to me, and Porco Rosso is an underrated film.
It is. It's probably one of my favorites. That and Castle in the Sky.
Castle in the Sky is wonderful.
It is.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
So, so moving on a bit, as we're sort of talking about this, we should always be careful that, we're not sort of like resting on our laurels with this. The real fact is that, a lot of people die, and honestly, more people are dying now than were when things were kind of bad during the mid '90s. You have characters, like in my own life, a friend lost his brother suddenly. I met another guy who claimed that his friend was shot, the night before. Sure, this is bar talk and whatnot, but it does affect these people, and a lot of them just kind of don't have an answer. They have a wake, they have the funeral, and then they move on with their lives. They don't seek God in this. The pain is just pain to them. It's like an animal who gets hit and doesn't really know what to do with it. And
Yeah,
yeah.
well, look, I mentioned, like, when we say Christianity is growing in the Middle East, I don't know how new this is, but I will say that there was a time that was not that long ago that Christianity, you would have said it was dying out in the Middle East.
Yep.
And that has reversed itself. Like, that trend, which is remarkable that that's happened. And for that, you could give all credit to the missionaries, both Protestant and Catholic. Catholic missionaries tend to be religious orders that get sent in. Protestant missionaries tend to just be well-meaning people who love Christ and want to put their lives on the line. Both groups have done God's work in the Middle East to have reversed, like, the decline in Christianity in the region. But with that said, the violence remains.
Yep.
Like, it's not that they're not being persecuted any less. If anything, far from it, they're being persecuted more. You start to see, too, news stories start to pop up of churches finally starting to defend themselves. Like, parishes who arm themselves with machine guns and be like, yeah, if they try and take us out, then we're going to fight back.
Yep.
And then you get, idiotic commenters who go like, that's not how a church should react. It's like, so you should just let everybody die instead. Like, no, that's absolutely how you need to react when people are trying to kill you. Just being Christian does not mean that you could just let people come and kill you in your pew. That's not what being a Christian means. Like, so anybody who criticizes people who actually who decide to defend themselves, like, that disturbs me. That really bothers me. Like, don't criticize the people who take up arms to defend themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, this is not time where we should be resting on our laurels, where we should be going, oh, looks like Christianity's in a good spot right now. No, we're not. We're not at all. We're in a very fragile, precarious spot. When you, again, like, I mentioned all of that earlier about, like, the Catholic Church and why I think the Catholic Church is growing, and the reason I think the Catholic Church continues to grow is because it's being persecuted in areas of the world. But the fact of the matter is, having this horrible leadership in the Vatican is not a situation that you want to be in, right? Like, and I think, too, that this is true of Protestants as well. I don't think a Protestant wants a leftist, which is what Francis is, in the Vatican.
Right.
Like, this is not good for Christianity. Even if you aren't Catholic, people will see what the Pope says, and they will think that, well, this is the biggest Christian. People who don't know anything about it, right?
He's got the biggest hat.
Right. He's got the biggest hat, so he must be the biggest Christian. And he says we should just love each other. Gay of the year. Oh, there was just an article, I linked it in the meme Zam, that was hilarious, where it's like, Francis was named, like, one of the Jews of the year or something, and I said, for some reason, this does not surprise me at all. It makes perfect sense to me.
Absolutely understandable.
It was just an article, it was like, Pope Francis named, like, one of the top Jews of 2022. Or 2021 or something. It's like, yeah, no, that tracks. That
we accept this.
I get it. I'm not proud of it, but I get it. But that's kind of the problem, right? Where it's like, even if you're a Protestant, you don't want to see the head of the Christian church being like, looking like he's going to reverse things like teachings on homosexuality, on abortion, on whatever. Now, Francis hasn't, but he's also been, like, he's presented himself in such a way to make people think that this is, like, where Christianity can go. Christianity can't go there, guys. Like, this is the problem with, like, Father James Martin. Like, So I think it was the Catholic apologist Trent Horn talked about this. He said that James Martin, who is a Jesuit, may Allah forgive us, Jesuit, uh, he is a Jesuit priest and he is a slime. Like, honestly, I have no idea how he has permission to continue preaching in the church. Like, it boggles my mind that he has faculties to keep publicly preaching, but whatever. Uh, Anyway, he talks in that very Jesuitical style that Francis also talks in, though James Martin is clearly more clever than Francis is. Not that I would necessarily say that Francis was stupid, but Martin has mastered this, right? Yeah, of saying things without saying them. So, an example would go like this. James Martin will make a comment after Roe v. Wade that, like, I understand that all human life is valuable, but zygotes are clearly different than adult people. Now, in a vacuum, with no context at all, if you just take it on strictly factual merits, this is technically correct. Zygotes and adult humans are not the same. That's why there are different terms for them. If they were the same, there would not be different names for each stage. So, you respond to Father James Martin's comment very confused and say, so are you saying then that zygotes don't have the right to not be killed? To which Father James Martin will respond with, hold your horses, son. I never said that. I just pointed out that they're different. And then you go, okay, but so what? And then he'll go, well, it struck a nerve since you're upset. Then he will invite somebody on who is a pro-choice activist who will talk and who will say something like, this overturning of Roe v. Wade really shows that there is a lack of compassion for women because, we're judging zygotes as being more valuable than grown adult humans and it's wrong. And Father Martin will not say anything himself, but he will nod sagely and go, yes, that's a very wise point. Thank you for sharing. I think we need to take this viewpoint into consideration. Somebody will respond with, but Father James Martin. Like, that clearly does not mean that you can just murder zygotes. Why would you think you could do that? There's no logical through line here. To which Father Martin will say, hold on, I never said that. I just said we need to take this perspective into account. And round it goes.
Yep.
Now, this is how Jesuits talk. It's also how Francis talks, but Father James Martin is much better at it than Francis is. He made his career on this. Somebody once asked me, why is he even still Catholic then? I said, well, because if he wasn't Catholic, then he could not claim to be the pro-gay Catholic priest. Yeah, that's why he needs to remain Catholic, and he can't explicitly go against any teachings. So, the problem with Father James Martin is that he gives the impression that the church is going to change its teachings on homosexuality.
Right.
So, he will give the impression we're reaching a new springtime, in the church, and we're finally going to accept people of different sexualities. And then the Pope will make a comment because the Pope, for all of his flaws, is not prepared to explicitly change doctrine. Where he will tell the German synod bishops, you can't do that, right?
Right.
You can't change doctrine. Cut it out.
This isn't.
And then,
Yeah.
what you will see is that people who are responding to Father Martin are really angry because they're like, you lied to us. You were telling us that things were going to change, but nothing's changed at all. And he just kind of avoids responding, because that's what Jesuits do.
Yeah.
That's one of the dangers that's not really talked about, is that, when you lie to people like that... I'm trying to think of how to put it. When you lie to people like that, you're really hurting people who need your help and are struggling.
Yep.
And instead of offering them help, you're telling them, don't worry, the church will change. You don't need to change. You're good just as you are, meaning you're letting them suffer, you're letting them go to hell. even because of what you think, and then they feel lied to and betrayed because, frankly, you did lie to them, and you did betray them. They quite correctly have called you out on this. Like, that's that's really where that's how I see Father James Martin. That's also how I see Francis, right? Like,
Right.
I Amoris Laetitia, and that's the Jesuitical style in play right there. You know, step one, like, say something that technically is not false, but sounds like it could be false if you interpret it the way that most people probably will. You know, like, for example, people who are divorced and remarried should maybe be considered for communion again, right?
Right.
And then you go, but wait, Pope, you can't do that, right? And then I'll go, well, hold on. I never actually said that you should give it to them. I'm just saying you should consider each case individually. What if there's a really bizarre niche case where technically, I can't even think of one, but I'm sure there's something,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what if a really bizarre niche case pops up and you just haven't considered it? And then you go, oh, is that what you meant? And then he goes silent.
Yep. Just doesn't respond.
Right, he just refuses to say anything more. Because clearly, what he wants you to think when you hear that is give communion to people who are divorced and remarried. He does not want you to think, consider that there might be a bizarre niche case that you might need to consider. Now, he hasn't actually said that, though. And
Right.
that's because if he actually said that, it would be very clearly false, and you can't say that. So, he talks around it.
And
It's
it's
very
something that
disturbing,
right.
and I don't like modern Jesuits.
And of course it affects the church as well, just in general. Like if the pastor, if the priest, or if the Jesuit can't speak properly on Scripture, it does hurt everyone who
Oh,
is
yeah.
unfortunate to hear it. Like you've said earlier. And the thing with that though is that like these people also will clearly leave the second the going gets good. If they don't get what they want, they will not stick around and do the work. They're not Christian. They never were Christian to begin with. And ripping off that band-aid is very important with how we relate to things in mission work and so on and so forth. We're not doing it because James Martin said something clever on Twitter. We're doing it because the Bible commands. And it's hard to kind of separate it out. Ultimately, if somebody says, well, what about James Martin, and what he said with, it's like, well, yeah, no, but he's a complete, total heretic. We don't actually listen to James Martin. But the thing is, they don't understand that either.
Right.
It's,
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely correct. And, uh, yeah, that's how I view that's how Francis kind of does everything. He will not directly contradict church doctrine because, again, like I said,
right.
if you want to go to a more secular, perspective that you might understand as a Protestant, like, or that you might, more be able to accept as a Protestant, the structure of the church is very much against doing that.
Right.
Like, there's so much pushback that you need to do to directly contravene a doctrine, and it would it would shake things up so much that basically what you would be doing would almost be destroying the church as a structure, which is not what he wants to do. He wants to undermine it, right? Which is
Yep.
different. This is the same reason that Father James Martin won't say anything directly against the church. He doesn't want the church to not exist. It's a great tool for evil if you can subvert it properly. Uh,
Yep.
Now, do I think he's going to succeed in doing that? I mean, I'm a Catholic, so you do the math. No, I don't think that he'll ultimately succeed. But I do think that's what Pope Francis is trying to do. I will say, this is the kindest thing I could say. I don't think that Pope Francis believes that he is doing that. Like, I think he just thinks he's trying to move the church in a more compassionate direction. You know, at least in some senses. I do think that the moving around of sexual abusers is just evil. Like, I don't really
Yes.
get why you would even do that. But in terms of a lot of his commentary, I don't think he thinks of it as, yes, I must undermine the church from within. That's certainly possible. I don't, if I learned that he was genuinely an enemy agent, like explicitly, like working for the Freemasons or something, I mean, I don't think he is. It doesn't really fit with Freemason doctrine. But if I learned that, like, it would not totally shock me, but I don't think that's what we're seeing.
Right.
And it's hard for me to imagine that too. Now, the question is, I think really, like, the most interesting question right now is, okay, with Francis, we got to survive Francis. To be honest, his health is on the decline. He's using a wheelchair more often recently. Like, there has been more and more talk, buzzing about him even resigning, which he's not going to do until Benedict dies, by the way. There is no way. No way
Right.
that they would let there be two retired popes at the same time. But, uh, like, I think the most interesting thing is, what will the next pope be? Now, before, I would have told you that I would think that there would have been a traditionalist backlash. I no longer think that, and the reason I no longer think that is that most of the cardinals have been picked by Francis now. Which is a disturbing thought. So it's quite possible that the next pope that we get is actually worse than Francis. However, who knows? It's hard to tell, because in the history of like papal elections, people try. There's a favorite that emerges, but then the vote gets split, and then you need to decide on a compromise candidate. So it's hard to pick. I will note that there is this misconception that Francis like came out of nowhere to be pope. Now, at the time of the elections, I was in high school, but I was following the papal election very closely. I did go to a Catholic school, so like everybody was super invested in this. Yeah. And when Francis was elected, like, he
Yeah.
had been mentioned. There's this misconception that he came entirely out of nowhere. That isn't true. There were literally like betting pools for who would be the next pope, and
Right.
I had who my favorites. I wanted Cardinal Robert Sarah, who, by the way, is still alive, and who I would still like to be pope, because he's amazing. Robert Sarah is one of the African cardinals, uh, and I was hoping that he would end up as pope. And then Francis was picked. Francis was like on the black horse list, where people were like, oh, if things, don't work out for any of the favorites, like, watch out for Francis, and then he ended up getting picked. So it's a misconception that he came entirely out of nowhere. He did not.
Right.
With that said, he was not the favorite in advance, and I do remember as soon as he was elected, a lot of people were like, I am very uncomfortable that he is a Jesuit.
The only reasonable choice.
Yes, there are good Jesuits. Father Mitch Pacwa is the main one. And if I were Pope, I would not eliminate the Jesuits. What I would do is I would give Mitch Pacwa the reins, and I would order him to do a purge. And
The purge.
I'm not even kidding. Like, that is entirely serious, too. Like, I would bring in Mitch Pacwa, and I would go, I'm making you Inquisitor of the Jesuits. Like, if you suspect that there is anybody who is less than orthodox, entirely orthodox in their beliefs or teachings, I want you to report them to me, and I will put them on ecclesiastical trial, and then we will decide their fate. And I would purge the Jesuits.
I mean, don't get
Like,
me wrong. You would randomly die very fast, but
I
I would
would.
love to see it.
Would be worth it.
Yep. The
It would be worth
lols.
it. Yeah, we had discussion over like what happened with the Jesuits in the Superversive forum once before. Like, the first generation Jesuits, first off, I'm going to just go on the record and say that the first generation Jesuits were incredible Christians. They deserve all of the credit that they get. St. Ignatius of Loyola, St. Francis Xavier were two of the greatest saints in the history of the church. They evangelized basically all of Asia, and St. Ignatius of Loyola was an incredible saint. He's generally seen as like the founder of the Jesuits, even though there were multiple. St. Francis Xavier was like almost single-handedly responsible for evangelizing Asia. Now, obviously, this is after, St. Thomas the Apostle quite possibly evangelized India, but, in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, early Renaissance, late Middle Ages, right?
Yeah.
Francis, so they were amazing saints. And I would argue, like, I would die on that hill for Ignatius of Loyola and Francis Xavier. But it is indisputable as well that the Jesuits devolved very quickly. I have heard multiple theories on this, and I am not decided on any one. So I'm not sure exactly what happened. One theory I heard is that the Jesuits' mission specifically put them like in line with secular rulers, so they had to develop a way of speaking where they did not technically lie, but they were hiding what they were saying, and this turned into like the modern day Jesuitical, twisty word,
Right.
twisty talking, where they don't technically say something false, but it's clearly false. That's one theory I heard. Another theory I heard was simply that they were given too much power by the Pope and it went to their head because they were so successful in the early days. Like, just a much simpler theory,
Yeah.
that they were very, very successful, and they were actually, like, kind of on thin ice in the early years because people were suspicious of them, but they were so successful that the Pope ended up becoming their ally and gave them a lot more power and leniency, and this went to their head, and this caused them to become corrupt. That sounds the most plausible to me, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just considering the era of what happened, I honestly think it was just the fact that they were given so much favor by the Pope, like, the power went to their head.
Yeah.
And to be fair to the Jesuits, throughout history, there have been several incredible Jesuit martyrs who have gone into, like, Native American territory or Native Indian, Native South American or whatever territory, tried to evangelize to them, and then, like, got everybody in their group killed. And they deserve respect for that.
Yep.
But
Doing mission
whenever,
work and whatnot, Jesuit or otherwise, provided
yeah,
that there weren't some tricks behind it. Who
they were
knows?
martyred for it though. Like they suffered for Christ, and like they were inspiring. Like this is there was a movie about this called The Mission that was about like a Jesuit mission in South America that ended up like everybody in that mission was martyred. So I would give them some credit. But the modern Jesuits, with the exception, as far as I know, like the pretty much sole exception, though I'm sure this isn't literally true, but with the more or less sole exception of Father Mitch Pacwa, who's awesome, highly recommend him. Like they're pretty much a joke, and
Yep.
it's sad. Got nothing to say, nothing nice to say about the modern Jesuits.
Yep.
I think of the modern groups. I'm talking now from an entirely Catholic perspective. I don't know what the main Protestant missionary groups are, and they're also not exactly the same thing as Catholic religious orders either. But of the modern religious orders, I would say the ones that are most impressive, the Mother Teresa's Sisters of Charity, do great work. From my understanding, they still are like they're really, really incredible. What the Sisters of Charity.
Mm-hmm.
The Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. The Franciscans tend to have a very Protestant almost view to how they work because the Franciscans are inspired by the example of Saint Francis. So the way that the Franciscans have avoided going as corrupt as the Jesuits is that every time they get more decadent, a group of people who want to be more radical break off. And the current crop of like radical Franciscans are the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. I actually know one of the priests. He's the current priest at a church at a shrine that's near my house, and he's awesome. So Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, really good group. Very good at urban evangelization, from my understanding. let's see, of the modern religious groups, like, what are the really impressive ones in the modern day? Yeah, there's... sadly, a lot of them have gotten very corrupt. There are still good Dominicans, and I have a soft spot for the Dominicans. But, and there are a lot of good ones, but as an overall group, they are in need of reform. The Carmelites, probably in need of reform. The Salesians can be a little bit liberal occasionally with some of the comments they make. I mean, I think that the best evangelists currently, I would say, in the urban areas, from what I know of, at least, to be clear, so I could just be totally misled, but the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal are very good at urban evangelization, and the Sisters of Charity are very, very good at serving in, like, the poorest areas of the world, and really getting with the down and dirty and the absolute worst, most dangerous, most, poverty-stricken areas in the world, and they will evangelize to them, and they will serve them, and that's really impressive. The the Sisters of Charity, it's interesting reading people who visit with the Sisters of Charity. They say that, like, the modern-day Sisters of Charity are, like, allergic to any sort of comfort at all. Like, that they refuse to even accept donations. Like, because they don't want, that's not why they're there. They don't want it.
Yep.
So, Ben, do you know any Protestant groups that are currently doing missionary work today that you know of that are successful?
So it's a very long history, and it's kind of hard to start. One of the best ones that I personally enjoy is Nate Saint, who himself, shall we say, wasn't very successful, as he was eaten. But his wife was very successful in converting the very men who ate her and Mrs. Elliot's husband. Uh, the IFCA is very successful all over the world. Many of them do quite a few missionary and church planting work. The thing is that, like, successful, it's hard to gauge. Not because of any particular, like, fault of the missionaries themselves. It's like, oh, so, we've just talked about the Jesuits, who spread all over the world. Probably spread too much, just saying. But, it's not quite the same thing. Um, Many people have been saved. The music director's son has come back from a successful mission trip where he went to Thailand and helped out the people there. But it's hard to, I wish I could give you more than that. Like,
I get you.
it's
Like, I
it's
knew.
it's like churches are being planted, people are going to those churches, but it's harder to do it. Like, there's harder to quantify it. There were some Mennonites who sold themselves into slavery, a few hundred years ago. They were very successful in places like Haiti and whatnot until uh, the revolutions, uh, which killed a lot of the Christian influence there. There's uh,
Yeah, and
I'm
to be
just trying
clear,
to
like,
limit
I've
it to.
mentioned.
Mhm.
Right, I mentioned two groups that I knew of, and there are surely much more that I just don't know about.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean to imply that these are the only groups doing evangelization. In fact, I know for a fact that's not true, because as we've pointed out, Christianity is growing, including Catholicism, meaning there must be groups that I'm not aware of
Yeah.
doing this. I just don't know them. I know of those two. Sisters of Charity, I know for a fact, doing great work, and the Franciscan
Yeah.
Friars of the Renewal, I know for a fact, are doing great work.
And there's just a lot to it that's kind of like going underneath the radar, just because you look out and you see, oh, look at those Pentecostals, really successful. They're not really successful. They're just like, I guess they're successful in the sense of growing, but it's like Pentecostals don't preach the gospel. But what they do is get people to read their Bibles. What they do is force people to actually attend services and, interact with the world they're in. There's benefits to it that lead people to the gospel, even though, they may never have gone into a church before, which I think is much more important than, a lot of this stuff, because it's like, the Jesuits have this history to them, but at what cost? Certain Protestant groups, the Pentecostals, have, reputation as being, very ungodly, very money hungry. Many charlatans can go into the Pentecostal church and be very successful. There was a cult, I think, that ultimately became the Waco cult, that, if I recall the history of them correctly, where it's like, yeah, it started off with Pentecostals, and they argued over the end times, time and time and time and time again, and eventually you get Waco. But it's not like that, but it is like that, and I wish I could do sort of like more in depth to it. At least I think Waco was an offshoot of the Pentecostals. Like a nine
Watch
times.
Wendigoon's video on it.
I know, I just can't remember offhand, and I don't want to post it. Wendigoon sama. No, that's cringy. That's cringy. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, but the point is that the things were given on this. It doesn't end just because, one missionary group is the be-all, end-all. Samaritan's Purse, even though Franklin Graham and Billy Graham sometimes are a little bit shady, and I don't mean in the sense of like Creflo Dollar shady, it's just that they're friendly with politicians. And that's a reason to suspect everyone. No joke, no irony. The friendlier you are with politicians, the kind of more suspect you kind of are. But then again, they do good work. It's hard to... it's just hard to sort of break it down. I don't know how to say it in a way that's simple. In Samaritan's Purse, you can buy a goat that gets to a family in Vietnam. Or the Amazon rainforest. You get to choose. It's not as bad as like, some of the slacktivism that goes on with people, but it has its place. I just wish I could do better describing it. There were some Protestant missionaries from IFCA who came into my church. And the joke was for him, he's like, he looks at me and he's like doing a Sunday school thing after the the proper church service, and he goes, hey, you look like a bouncer. I'm like, yeah, that's what I did last night, and he's like, oh, and it's like, okay, this is going to be interesting, and he and I talked about it. He was the one who told me that, the Pentecostal sort of like movement is opening up a lot of people to the gospel, just because, they're reading their Bible, they're actually interacting with the Word, and they're discovering that, maybe the Pentecostal guy isn't the best one to teach them. But then again, the more they know, the more they interact with people, the more they plug in, the greater the chances is that the gospel is succeeding. Another person came in from China for a ministry I am not going to name for obvious reasons. But essentially, I asked him about, Xinjiang, and it's like, yeah, we'd like to go out more into that part of the world, but it's just hard. They want to do it, but it's just a little bit hard. It's a little bit difficult, and probably, we'll see it happen in a little bit. Where more can be done in places that have, severe costs attached to them. But honestly, while I want to know about them, I kind of don't need to know about them. You know what I mean?
I get you.
Because partially it's because the more they're talking about it, the more chances they get that security is going to be breached. But also because I'd rather just hear that the good work is being done, that people are being saved. You know, not that I'm complaining that the Lord moves slowly. The more Lord moves at his right time. But you just kind of think about it. It's like, yeah, I kind of want more. I'm hungry for more. I was able to last night speak to a person who was talking to me about Tolkien, and I was kind of able to get them to remember that the Lord of the Rings cannot be understood without Christianity. Uh, the Lord of the Rings is a Christian story. It is fundamentally a Christian story, just like it's an English story. Just like The Hobbit is very English, so too is um,
Yeah, it's a thoroughly English story.
but it's also thoroughly Christian as well.
Yes, it's thoroughly Catholic and explicitly so, as
Yep.
there's the famous quote from one of Tolkien's letters where he said that it was unconsciously at first, but then consciously in revision.
Yep.
That was one of in ye olden days when Jeffro was more active than now, and there were the discussions between the superversive movement and the pulp rev movement. That was one of the debates with Jeffro. Like he did not like he was not a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings. I won't say he didn't like it. That's not true. He did like it, but he thought that the Lord of the Rings, one of the issues with it was that it was not explicitly Christian. And he said, like, and I said, dude, like, you're criticizing the Lord of the Rings for something it was never meant to be. Like, it's not, J.R.R. Tolkien wasn't avoiding Christianity because he was not trying to offend people. It was because that wasn't the sort of story that he wanted to tell.
Yep.
To which Jeffro responded, I don't think it's that unusual to say that an Oxford Don would find overt Christianity kind of declass, I think he said. And I said that would be a very good argument if C.S. Lewis was not also an Oxford Don at the same time
Yep.
and was very openly Christian. So no, I don't think that's it. Like, you could criticize Tolkien for many things, but to criticize him for not presenting his vision, I don't think, I think that's ridiculous. With all due respect to our boy Jeffro, whose Appendix N is a must-read book,
Yep.
uh, and who is awesome, and we all love him, but he is absolutely wrong about J.R.R. Tolkien. uh, J.R.R. Tolkien. First off, I think that The Lord of the Rings is one of the great books. I think it's probably the last great, capital G, great book, like in the Western canon of literature, that's been written. But even besides that, like, there are things you might want to criticize The Lord of the Rings for, but compromising on the vision is not one of them. In fact, I would go so far as to say that fundamentally misunderstands who J.R.R. Tolkien is as a person if you think that he was compromising his vision for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just agree with that.
So, we are at 8:44. Do you have anything that you want to talk about that we did not get to, or are you ready to wrap up?
Not only is the okay. Not only is the spread of the gospel the responsibility of missionaries, evangelists, and more, it's the responsibility of the people like you and me. And I think the longer we go on, the more options we find on it. I myself have started praying quite often for the opportunity to witness to others, and I've been finding them. And I think that,
I've had a lot of opportunities.
yep, with your profession, and even with my profession, I met a guy, and he said this and that, and it was the old story. Well, my parents weren't really Christian. No, I don't really see it. It never clicked with me, and it's like, well, yeah, but it's this, and I just kind of like, chatted with him about it, because I have a certain way, with men. I'm not very good with women, but I can speak to men and they tolerate it, because I speak with certain energy and I speak with certain confidence. Figure out who your audience is. Maybe the Lord's telling me, hey, witness to men more than women because you can't handle it. Okay. So like I'm not gonna stop it. And I'm able to sort of like crack little things here and there. I've interacted with very hard men who have done hard things. They need Christ. They need Christ just like everyone else, sure. I'm absolutely worthless to them except as a pleasurable companion who can speak with many things and can be taught and interact well with them. But if I can also provide them, you know, a point, a pointing to, salvation, that would be great.
So, the last thing I wanted to say before we go is, then I managed to secure us a special guest.
Wait.
Can I announce it, or would you rather I
No,
not?
don't announce anything. Who knows what can happen? I
We
haven't
did
even.
schedule it, though.
Okay, if it's scheduled, that's fine. Go
I
for
mean,
it.
I scheduled it on Calendly, which is what he gave me. Like, I talked to him, he gave me the link to his scheduler, and I found a free time, and I put us in, so we're scheduled.
Yeah, okay.
Alright, so I'm
Saturday
going
this.
to announce this is something that has been in the works literally for several months, so I will explain, because this is entirely my doing, because I thought it was a good idea, and also I really like this guy. So, there is a YouTube channel. Some of you may or may not have heard of. In this sphere, it's possible some of you have heard about it, but probably not. However, it's getting more popular. It's fairly popular at the moment, called Gospel Simplicity. Uh, it's run by a young man named Austin Skuggs, I believe his name is, Skuggs. And Austin is a Christian, and even he was originally at least an evangelical who went to Moody Bible College in I want to say Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong about that.
Chicago. One of the
So
last
he just
things
had
in Chicago.
what was that?
It's one of the last good places in Chicago.
There you go. So Illinois, Chicago. So he went to Moody Bible College, and the story of his channel is that he just started a little gospel, a channel called Gospel Simplicity, which is just a Christian channel where he talked about his faith and things like that. Then one day, he talked about how he was invited to a Catholic Bible study, and a few months later, he decided to go and visit a Catholic Mass. And the Catholic Mass that he happened to visit was the Latin Mass in Chicago, which actually might be gone now because the Archbishop just cracked down on it, but that's neither here nor there. I don't know if it was the Mass that he went to or not, but it might have been. Anyway, he went to the Latin Mass in Chicago, and he reported his thoughts on the Latin Mass, and this exploded popularity in his channel. Then he started going to an Orthodox Divine Liturgy, and he posted his thoughts on that. Then he posted a video where he went to a Syro-Malabar Catholic Church, which is actually how I discovered him. I love the Eastern Catholic churches. I love the history of Christianity and the fact that these ancient Eastern churches are still around and still exist and are still a spiritual resource. It's something that fascinates me. I love visiting them. I have visited a Syro-Malabar church before, and I was planning on doing it when his video came out, so I watched it very excited, and it was great. Austin is an awesome dude. If you follow his channel, you get this theme of Catholic-Protestant dialogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Austin is not a Catholic. He is still a Protestant, so he has not converted to either Catholicism or Orthodoxy. He has spoken, though, to Catholic monks. He has spoken to Coptic priests, Coptic Orthodox, I mean. He has spoken to Western Rite Orthodox priests. He has spoken to Orthodox professors. He has spoken to Protestant professors. He has visited evangelical churches. He's visited Orthodox churches. He's visited Catholic churches. And throughout all of this, he's spoken to both Orthodox and Catholic apologists and evangelists and people like that. I believe the last that I saw, he was attending an Anglican church. He believed in the real presence of the Eucharist, but he believed in it in the way that Calvin did, which is interesting, I must say. I find that fascinating. Uh, and he interviewed a guy who I think is awesome, and I highly recommend you guys check out, Brett Selkeld, who wrote a book basically where he was trying to say that there could be more of a synthesis between Catholic and Protestant views on the Eucharist than is commonly believed. And the announcement is we will be meeting with Austin on August 20th, Saturday, at 4 p.m. for an hour. I contacted him a few months ago. He was about to get married and about to graduate college. Both of those things he has now done. So congratulations to him. I said that me and my friend Ben were discuss Christianity. We would have these streams where we would put up different positions and we would explain it from a Catholic and a Protestant perspective. And that I would love to talk to him and get his perspective as a Protestant who has been more open to exploring the Orthodox and the Catholic churches. And I think I highly recommend. So, what I'll say about Austin is this: I will highly recommend his channel to anybody. At the moment, it's actually kind of cool that he is Protestant, and I could recommend his channel because I could recommend it to Protestants, and they don't think I'm trying to trick them. You know, like if I recommend Trent Horn, who is a Catholic apologist, people are like, "Oh, you're trying to convert me." But no, like he's still Protestant.
I smell Jesuit tricks.
Exactly. But no, Austin is still Protestant. He is an extremely humble person. I really, really love his approach. It's a very questioning, very open approach. He's willing to hear people out. He's willing to listen to the arguments. You know, he's willing to change his views if he is convinced, but he is not. He doesn't move with the wind. You know,
Right.
he doesn't. And he's just a really, really great guy. His page is great. Tons of great videos. Ben, there's a video of his you might want to check out recently that was 5 bad arguments for Catholicism. You
Amazing.
might be. What was that?
I gotta go see that.
Yeah, you might be interested in it. And he's right; they were bad arguments. To my knowledge, he is still in. You know, he has said he's definitely still considering. He hasn't converted or not converted, but he is open. So that's all great, and I am very, very excited to talk to Austin and get his perspective on Protestant Catholic dialogues. You know, as an evangelical who is, open to learning about the apostolic churches, which, by the way, I use in a technical sense, meaning Orthodox Catholic, right?
Oh.
The Orthodox Catholic and Eastern churches, I think it's a real, and the fact that he has such a humble point of view, that he is so willing to listen, so willing to talk, I think he's a great, great role model, and I am really looking forward to speaking with him. Ben, I will link you his video. I think you'll like it.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say, Ben?
I said it. Don't forget that the mission isn't just for the missionaries, it is for us every day, all the time. Thank you for joining us. I hope you look forward to our stream. Though, admittedly, it's going to be a little awkward because I'll be driving home from a vacation. Terrifying. Disgusting.
Woohoo! That's okay. I'll be leading. I asked you the date, Ben.
Okay.
That's okay. I'll lead it. I'm more interested in speaking with him anyway. But if you can't, just know that if you can't participate, I will be spending the stream trying to convert him.
Oh no, I gotta be
No,
there then.
I'm
Well,
kidding.
thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful night. And we're done.
Woohoo!